The call came from Colonel Tom Parker. Elvis Presley wanted to record "I Will Always Love You," and Parker had one condition: half the publishing rights. Dolly Parton was 27 years old, a girl from a Tennessee holler who had spent a decade clawing her way into Nashville, writing songs before the sun came up, singing for anyone who would listen, building something that was entirely and only hers. She said no. She said no to Elvis Presley. She hung up the phone and she cried because she understood what that decision cost, but she kept the rights. That is the Dolly Parton the world recognizes, the woman who holds what she builds, the woman who turns down kings and smiles while she does it. But sit with her across from Johnny Carson's desk, somewhere in the mid-1980s, in the full height of her fame, in the rhinestones and the hair and the smile that could light an empty room, and watch what she gives away without anyone noticing, every night, freely, into rooms that laughed and applauded and never once thought to ask what the joke was covering, the real story, disguised as a punchline, gone in the applause before it ever had a chance to surface. Have you ever watched someone perform a version of themselves so convincingly that you couldn't see they were disappearing inside it? Leave a comment below, because that question is at the center of everything that follows. Locust Ridge is not a town. It is a bend in a road in Sevier County, Tennessee, pressed against the edge of the Great Smoky Mountains, where the soil was thin and the winters were long, and there was not much margin for anything. Dolly Rebecca Parton was born there on January 19, 1946, the fourth of 12 children, and then a 13th came after. Her father, Robert Lee Parton, was a sharecropper who could not read or write. The doctor who delivered Dolly was paid with a sack of cornmeal. That is not a detail from a folk song. That is the transaction that brought her into the world. The house had no electricity and no running water. 12 children in 2 rooms. Her mother, A.V. Lee, sewed a coat for Dolly out of rags and scraps, every color she could find, stitched together into something that was supposed to keep her warm and ended up being something else entirely. Years later, Dolly would write a song about that coat. She would call it her coat of many colors, and she would say that wearing it was the richest she had ever felt. The children at school laughed at her. She wore it anyway. That particular combination, the refusal to be diminished, dressed up as something cheerful, would become the defining posture of her entire public life. What she had instead of money was sound. Church music first, the Pentecostal kind, where feeling was the whole point and restraint was not considered a virtue. Her grandfather, Jake Owens, was a preacher. The music in those services was not background, it was the main event. Dolly absorbed it the way children absorb language, without deciding to, without effort, as though it were simply the air in that particular place. Then her uncle Bill Owens handed her a guitar when she was 7, and something clicked into place that never came unclicked. She had been composing before that in the only way available to her. She would make up songs and sing them to her mother, who would write the words down because Dolly couldn't yet. The songs already had structure. They already had the shape of something finished. Her mother kept them. That detail matters. In a household of 13 people with no margin for sentiment, someone thought those songs were worth keeping. Uncle Bill did more than hand her a guitar. He drove her to Knoxville at his own expense and on his own time so that a 10-year-old girl from Locust Ridge could stand in front of a camera at WIVK and sing on Cass Walker's Farm and Home Hour. For a family that ran on cornmeal and prayer, that was not a casual gesture. It was an act of belief. She performed with the kind of certainty that confuses people who haven't seen it in a child. Not performed confidence, but actual certainty. The people watching could feel the difference even if they couldn't name it. What was the moment you first understood that the place you came from would follow you everywhere, no matter how far you traveled? Leave it in the comments, because Dolly Parton never stopped carrying Locust Ridge, not even when she was standing in the middle of a spotlight 1,000 miles away. By the time she graduated from Sevier County High School in June 1964, finishing high school was itself an achievement in that community. Most of her siblings had not. She was the first in her immediate family. Her classmates signed her yearbook. The morning after graduation, she packed a single bag and got on a bus to Nashville. She was 18 years old. Her classmates assumed she would be back. She was not going back. Nashville in 1964 was not waiting for Dolly Parton. It was a city that had already decided what country music was supposed to sound like, what it was supposed to look like, and who was allowed to make it. She spent her first years there the way everyone does, knocking on doors, writing songs in cheap apartments, saying yes to everything, and being told no by most of it. She waitressed, she wrote, she kept the fixed point in view. The break came through Porter Wagoner. He was one of the biggest names in country music at the time. His television show reached millions of homes every week, and in 1967 he offered Dolly a spot as his featured female vocalist. She was 21. She took it. For 7 years they performed together, recorded together, built an audience together, and fought constantly about who she was supposed to be. Wagoner was generous and controlling in equal measure, and Dolly understood both things about him clearly. What she was learning was not just the music industry. She was learning the specific geography of being a woman inside it, which doors opened, which stayed locked, and which ones she would eventually have to build herself. The industry had a term for what she was, a girl singer, meaning the talent in the room that was not quite the main event, meaning the voice that made someone else's show complete. She watched how that worked, and she stored the information, and she did not complain about it out loud. She was building something, and she needed the stage. By 1973, she had written the song that would follow her for the rest of her life. I Will Always Love You was about leaving Porter Wagoner. It was a goodbye and a thank you and a statement of intent, all in 3 minutes. It went to #1. She left the partnership the following year, and Wagoner sued her for breach of contract. She settled for $1 million. She kept the publishing rights to the song. Then came the conversation with Colonel Tom Parker, the one the hook already placed you inside. No rights, no Elvis. The decision cost her the most famous recording artist in the world. What it bought her was the foundation on which she would eventually build an empire. The crossover came in 1977 with Here You Come Again, a pop-inflected single recorded not in Nashville but in New York, which caused real friction in the country music establishment. Purists felt she was abandoning the genre. The charts did not agree. It reached #1 on country and top 3 on pop simultaneously. Billboard named her the top female country artist of the year. She had understood something the industry hadn't, that the audience for her was larger than the box Nashville had drawn around her. By 1980, they were very large rooms. The film 9 to 5 opened in December alongside Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin. 3 women in a mainstream Hollywood comedy about the working conditions women endured every day. Dolly had never been on a professional film set before. She watched Fonda and Tomlin work, and she adapted, quickly and without apparent effort, the same way she had adapted to every room she had ever entered. Her title song, written on set, tapping her acrylic nails together as a percussion track, went to #1 on both the country and pop charts simultaneously. She had crossed over without leaving anything behind. The wit was quick. The jokes about her figure, her hair, her appearance, she told them first, faster than anyone else, in a way that seemed like unshakable confidence, but was, as she would later admit, something more functional than that. If she said it first, no one else could use it against her. It was a strategy she had been running since the school children laughed at her coat. It worked. It worked so well that by the early 1980s, the armor had become the performance, and the performance had become the brand. And somewhere inside all of it was the woman who had sung compositions to her mother before she could write them down, and she was getting harder and harder to find. Have you ever built something so successfully that the thing you built started to feel like it was built around you rather than by you? Leave a comment below, because that is the question that was beginning to press against everything in Dolly Parton's life. What the audience couldn't see from their seats was already taking shape, and what it became would come for everything she thought she was. Picture the Tonight Show studio somewhere in the mid-1980s. The cameras are warm, the audience is ready, and Dolly Parton walks out in full armor. The hair, the rhinestones, the smile that has been road-tested in 10,000 rooms. The applause is immediate and genuine. Johnny Carson stands to greet her, and the audience laughs before she has said a word, because just the sight of her is already the beginning of a joke she has been telling for 20 years. She sits down, she crosses her legs. She is, by every visible measure, completely at ease. The lives are real, the conversation is imagined, but what she was carrying into that studio on any given night during those years, that is documented. By the early 1980s, Dolly Parton had undergone a hysterectomy. She and Carl Dean had never had biological children. That had been a private grief they carried quietly through 20 years of marriage, and the surgery closed that door permanently. She has not dramatized this in interviews. She has simply acknowledged it, In the matter-of-fact way she tends to acknowledge the things that cost her the most. The weight came after the surgery, significant, undeniable weight, in a body she had spent her whole career performing in public, in an industry that expressed its opinions about women's bodies openly and without apology. And underneath the weight was something harder to name, a depression that arrived not with dramatic announcement, but with a gradual dimming, a disconnection from the work that had always been her anchor. Writing had always been the thing she could rely on. Suddenly, it wasn't working the way it had worked before. She has said she was closer to not surviving those years than almost anyone around her knew. Not the dramatic kind of not surviving, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't announce itself in a studio green room. So when she sat across from Carson and the first joke came about her figure, about the hair, about the exaggerated everything that was Dolly Parton, she delivered it with perfect timing. The audience laughed. Carson leaned forward with the easy warmth he extended to guests he genuinely liked, and she gave him another one and then another. The rhythm was effortless. The armor was flawless. It had been built over too many years by too skilled a hand to show a crack at this distance. But there is a kind of performance so practiced, it becomes its own disappearance. Every joke about herself was also a door she was closing. Every laugh was a room she was locking from the inside. The real weight, not the physical weight, but the grief underneath it, the disconnection from her own work, the self that had gotten misplaced somewhere between the surgery and the headlines, and the relentless machinery of being Dolly Parton. None of that had a language she could use in a television studio, not yet. The thing about armor is that it works in both directions. It keeps the outside world from reaching you. It also keeps you from reaching out. Carson was a perceptive man. 30 years behind that desk had given him an uncommon ability to watch people manage what they chose to show him. He asked good questions, but there are things a good question cannot reach. Not when the person across from you has spent an entire lifetime learning to answer before you finish asking. The joke arrives first. The laugh fills the space. The moment passes. Have you ever been in a room where the most important thing you could have said came out as a joke instead? Leave a comment below because that is what those mid-1980s Tonight Show appearances were. For Dolly Parton, distilled into a studio hour. The applause at the end of the segment was warm and long. She stood, she hugged him, she waved to the audience. The armor held. It always held. That was the problem. What it cost her to keep it in place, that is what came next. What came next was Carl Dean. He had been there the whole time, of course. Carl Dean, the asphalt paver from Nashville, who met Dolly on her first day in the city in 1964, who married her in 1966, who was famously and deliberately absent from everything that constituted her public life. He did not attend her shows. He did not give interviews. He had no interest in the machinery of fame and made no pretense of having any. For 20 years of marriage, he had been the one fixed point that was not aimed at anything, not a career milestone, not a public position, just a man who knew the difference between Dolly Parton the brand and the woman who had grown up in Locust Ridge and who had chosen the latter without reservation. In the mid-1980s, when the Depression was at its worst, it was Carl who held the private version of her together, not a therapist, not a manager, not a record label. Her husband, sitting with her in the quiet, the rest of the world never saw. She has been clear about this in the years since, and the plainness with which she says it tells you something about what it meant. She wrote her way through the rest of it. Songs the public never heard, written the same way she had always written, as a way of giving the unbearable a shape she could hold. She turned back toward Sevier County, toward the Smoky Mountains, toward the particular kind of quiet that place had always carried for her, even when she was 1,000 miles away from it. What do you do when the tools that carried you your entire life stop being enough, and you have to find out who you are without them? Tell us in the comments, because Dolly Parton had to answer that question in real time without an audience, with no guarantee of how it ended. By 1986, she opened Dollywood in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, a theme park built near the land where she had grown up, bringing employment and tourism to a county that had neither in abundance. She was 40 years old. It was the first time she had built something that was rooted in the ground rather than in a performance. In 1995, she launched the Imagination Library in Sevier County, mailing one free book per month to every child under 5 in the county, regardless of family income. The doctor who delivered her had been paid with a sack of cornmeal. She was paying something back in the most direct way she knew how. The Imagination Library eventually expanded beyond Sevier County, beyond Tennessee, into all 50 states and eventually into other countries. She funded it herself for years before corporate partnerships arrived. She has spoken about it with less performance than almost anything else in her public life. No jokes, no rhinestones in the framing. Just the simple logic of a woman who grew up without books making sure other children didn't have to. Carl Dean died on March 11, 2023. He was 82 years old. They had been married for 57 years. Dolly announced his passing quietly, in the way he had lived, without spectacle. The man who had chosen the private version of her, in every room, for more than half a century was gone. She kept working. In the months that followed, she said simply that she missed him every day and that she was grateful for every one of those 57 years. That is what she has always done with the things that cost her the most. She finds the exact true sentence and she says it, and she keeps going. The armor never fully came off, but she learned to wear it differently, not as a wall, but as a choice. Something she put on, something she could, when the room was right, set aside. There is something worth sitting with in this story, not about Dolly Parton specifically, but about what she reveals. She built her survival out of the same material as her suffering. The jokes about the hair, the rhinestone armor that the world read as confidence, all of it was originally a tool for getting through a room without being diminished. The tool worked so well it became the identity, and then the identity became the cage. Most of us do some version of this. We are just not doing it in front of a camera. What she found on the other side of the breakdown was not a simpler version of herself. It was a more honest one. A woman who understood that the armor was not the same thing as the strength, and that the strength had been there long before the armor arrived. It was there in a two-room house in Locust Ridge. It was there when she said no to Elvis. It was there when she picked up a pen in the dark and wrote her way through the things she couldn't say out loud. If this story stayed with you, hit the like button. Not for the algorithm, but because Dolly Parton's real story deserves to be seen. Subscribe to this channel if you want more stories like this one, lives that meant something, told the way they actually were. What city are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. We read every one. And if someone in your life is carrying something they haven't found the words for yet, share this with them today. Finally, if you could say one thing directly to Dolly Parton right now, what would it be?